And now, Kathy, I'm going to let you go. But, John, you stay right there. Don't you move. Don't you move, John Henderson, because we're going to add another person in here. Oh, my gosh. Ladies and gentlemen, he wrote this book on animation. It's essential. If you haven't read it, please do. But did you know that our guest right here, Mr. Leonard Maltin, also wrote a book called The Great American Broadcast, which covers the history of old-time radio? Well, John Henderson and I knew that, and today we are here to both talk to the lovely Mr. Leonard Maltin, not just about this book, but about times that he has encountered the Benny cast and crew.
Welcome.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry that I'm not talking to my pal Kathy Fuller down there in Austin, Texas.
Yes. Yeah, and actually you went down there to do something with her at her school recently, didn't you?
Yes, I did actually in the fall. Hi, Kathy. We got to meet face to face for the first time just this past fall. I was hired by the Harry Ransom Center, which is their incredible archive. They have the David O. Selznick archive. They have, and now they have the Robert De Niro archive, among many, many, many others. Researchers have to go there, make a pilgrimage there, which is no burden, no chore, because there's so much to discover, so much to see. First, what researchers call primary material. If you want to write about Gone with the Wind, you got to go there.
Yeah.
About Alfred Hitchcock in the 40s, you got to go there because Hitchcock was under contract to Selznick. So it's a place where one door opens 10 doors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure if we gave it just a few minutes thought, we'd find a Jack Benny connection.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And I want to read all the memos Selznick wrote in a fury and put them together in a 500-volume book called The Many Rants and Ravings of Mr. David O. Selznick.
Well, there is a great book, which is pretty thick, done by my late friend Rudy Belmer, called Memo from David O. Selznick.
That's right.
And if you haven't ever read it, it's a fantastic and fascinating book.
Wonderful. Now, we are here to talk about your book, The Great American Broadcast, and how in doing that and all the lovely work you've done in film over the years, that you got to interact with a lot of the Benny cast and crew. But I want to kick it off with this first question before we let John kind of handle some stuff here. This book is one of a few that exist about the history of old-time radio. You've got John Dunning's books, obviously, and scattered other ones covering this era. What prompted you to write the book, and how did you come about the process of handling radio research versus film research?
Well, it happened because my wife and I mentioned to a friend of ours when we were still living in New York, we're both native New Yorkers, my wife's favorite actor is Ronald Colman. And a friend said, well, have you heard the Jack Benny episodes with Ronald Colman? And we said, I'm sorry, but it's true. At the time, we said, duh, no. So he gave us audio cassettes, and we started listening to them in the car and fell in love with them. Then we moved from New York to Los Angeles, where we still live now, 38 years later. And at the time that we moved, John and Larry Gassman were still doing their Sunday night show on the public radio station, KPCC, and Bob Lyons and Barbara Watkins were doing theirs. And we just kind of got hooked. We went to our first Spurback meeting and saw our first recreation of old-time radio with original old-time radio actors.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is almost 40 years ago. So a great many of them were still alive and all their faculties and all their skills intact. And I fell in love with all of that. And when I fall in love with something, I have to write about it. That's just my MO. And I ended up pitching and selling an article to Smithsonian Magazine And at that moment in time, anybody that I approached about talk about radio was happy to talk about radio. They all loved the medium. I never met anyone who worked in that medium who didn't love it, cherish it, and miss it. And so I pitched my publisher a book, and they said, no, we're not interested. I said, but no, please, 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 please. And I groveled. and finally, they said yes. I had to pay for it and other work done, but and then other things got in the way. So it took me 11 years.
Wow.
To write it, which turned out to be a blessing because I kept meeting new people and getting new information and new material, and I also got to rethink and rewrite. I've always written on deadline, like most writers, but if you don't have a deadline, or if your deadline is extended, you get a chance to go back and reread what you've done. You can improve it. Definitely. So I'm very proud of the book. It didn't make the bestseller list, but I'm very, very proud of it.
Yeah, I just got my copy in the mail. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Can I still get my free CD?
Well, Carl Amari is still alive and well. And he's the kind of guy that would probably make good.
That's awesome. So tell us
I had this what I thought was a perfect tie-in idea, which was to glue a little sleeve inside the cover, the hardcover book with a CD inside. Multimedia. Why not? They said, well, it's going to cost 50 cents. And Carl was going to do it for free. Carl Amari of Radio Spirits at the time. He was going to do it for free just for the promotional tie-in.
Yeah.
But Penguin, my publisher, said it's going to cost 50 cents to glue those sleeves. And we don't want to spend that. And I was ahead of the game just by them publishing in the first place. So I couldn't press my luck.
So in doing the research for the book, tell us a little bit about the people you met, like Dennis Day.
I was working then for Entertainment Tonight, which at that time was a hugely successful and popular show.
Yes.
And being affiliated with it opened doors for me. It just gave me access to all sorts of people. Dennis came to ET to do an interview for some nostalgia piece they were working on. And so I, of course, grabbed hold of him for an additional 10 or 15 minutes. So it was a very brief chat that I had with him, but he was such a nice man and was ready, willing, eager to talk about his time with Jack.
What year approximately was this?
Well, I'm guessing in the mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
The single most exciting moment that I had in this arena was that I got to tap Frank Nelson on the shoulder, say, "Oh, Mister," and he turned around and said, at a volume level that I dare not try to reproduce. Yes. And of course, we didn't have any material written, so we couldn't go much more than a line or two of dialogue past that. But he was just a lovely man, and a wonderful interview. And he was emblematic of the radio actor, the curse and the blessing of the working radio actor. before he became so well established on Jack's show and other comedy shows for doing that, that bit, he played romantic leading men on Lux Radio Theater and on other popular dramatic shows, because in radio, it didn't matter what you looked like.
Mm-hmm.
If you had the ability to act and persuasive as a romantic leading man or leading lady, then you were a romantic man, a romantic lead, regardless of gender. And that's something that, of course, television took away.
Yes.
Yeah, because Henry Aldrich had that problem too in radio, because that won't translate to television.
Yeah.
We mentioned Catherine Seeley. I read her book, and she said William Conrad, who played Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke on the radio, couldn't make the leap to television because he looked nothing like Matt Dillon.
No, that cast all hoped to make the transition to TV. And their friend, Harry Bartell, who was a photographer in his avocation, photography, took pictures of all of them in costume on a Western street setting. And those pictures exist. They've been published now.
Oh, interesting.
In that very thick book on the history of Gunsmoke. And I think they look good in their costumes, and I think they would have been convincing. But William Conrad is not conventionally what we would think of as a cowboy or Western hero. And James Arness, just filled the bill.
Yeah. For the longest time, I was reluctant to watch the television show, having enjoyed the radio show so much, and not be able to get the original voices. Right.
You get spoiled by the radio show.
Yes.
Spoiled by that radio show in particular, because it represents the pinnacle of network radio production. And its use of Norman Macdonald, who directed it, was a stickler for realistic sound effects. They were going to walk from his sheriff's office, marshal's office, out of the office onto the wooden platform in front of it, and then into the dirt street across the street. So it had to sound different. Those footsteps had to reflect the change of setting. All within one scene, and he would make them do that. He was a really detail-oriented director, and they all responded to that. Meeting and getting an interview with him was a challenge, because he did not participate in any of Spurtvak's conventions or meetings. He politely turned down requests, and he got many of them from the folks in Seattle and from folks in Newark. And even when those requests were relayed through his good friend Parley Bayer, who played Chester, and he loved Parley and had great respect for him, but he just didn't feel like doing that kind of thing. And I had an actor friend named Jimmy Caron, who familiar character actor in later years, who worked with everybody. And Jimmy was the most social man I ever met. My wife says, Jimmy didn't know you didn't exist. He's the real estate broker who sells a house in Poltergeist. Mm-hmm. He's Jane Fonda's boss in The China Syndrome. He had occasional, plum parts like that. But he was a working actor his whole life. And his uncle was the great character actor Morris Karnofsky. Look him up, you'll recognize him. Old movies. Anyway, Jimmy had done an episode of Canon with William Conrad and befriended him. And Jimmy said, I'll get you to see him. Find a way to get you to see him. And Conrad gave me a challenge. He said, if you can get me a video copy of the 1939 movie of Mice and Men, I'll do the interview.
Oh, wow.
And I pulled some strings, and the engineering staff at ET was very kind, and they made a nice dub for me that I delivered. And that was the test I had to pass. And then Jimmy came that afternoon to Mr. Conrad's house, and we sat and had a wonderful, wonderful chat.
It's amazing that the price of an interview was telling us about the rabbits, George.
Yes, exactly.
That's an interesting insight into that, and also I'm very happy to always love Return of the Living Dead now, not just for James Karen, but for that favor he helped pull for you. So.
Well, yes. Well, there's many reasons to admire Jimmy, and that's just one.
Yeah. So, in the process of meeting the cast, I think one name sticks out for not just radio fans but animation fans, and it's Phil Harris. Talk about that, because I think he's the one that many people who don't know who Jack is might actually know who he is.
Well, yes. And now, of course, Disney has gone on and leapt through yet another generation or two. And so you can't be sure that today's kids are seeing the original animated Jungle Book from 1967. They're probably seeing some newer incarnation
right.
of it.
Right.
And at one time, that was his calling card for vast numbers of people. He's Baloo the bear. Not to mention the very similar characters he played in the Aristocats and Robin Hood, subsequent Disney animated features. Anyway, they were reissuing the Aristocats, and that was my opportunity to have Entertainment Tonight book an interview with him.
Wow.
They decided to do it at Disneyland, in a nice, comfortable bench with Tom Sawyer Island behind us. And I met Alice Faye subsequent to that, a year or two later. She said, "Who wore a purple sweater that day, didn't he?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I chose that sweater." and I have a souvenir photo of the two of us sitting on that bench. And he was just what you wanted Phil Harris to be. Open and friendly and easy to talk to, and he loved Jack. You can see him on the episode of This Is Your Life. You can see the affection between them, and he was so grateful. Everyone was grateful to Jack because Jack was generous, both literally and figuratively. Elliot Lewis, who occasionally appeared on Benny's show, said Jack would send him little bonus checks when he got laughs doing his oddball character.
Yeah. And Elliot Lewis was a big time, he went on to be a big time old time radio producer too, right?
Yes, he did. He wound up writer, producer, director, and incidentally actor. But acting was not incidental to his peers or his latter-day fans like us. He's so good in The Voyage of the Scarlet Queen, in which he starred. I asked everybody I interviewed who's the best radio actor, and all the West Coast people said without hesitation, Elliot Lewis.
Huh.
When he wound up playing Frankie Remly,
Yeah, that's right.
Phil Harris Alice Faye show for a number of years because he enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
He
And there,
enjoyed it.
and there was a point actually, even to when they ceased using the Remly name later on in the Phil and Alice show, they just referred to him as Elliot. So he got to the point where he could be just referred to as him, which is a great little accomplishment there.
But Phil was very grateful to Jack for the fact that when Phil and Alice got their own show on Sunday night, immediately following Jack at 7:30, but on NBC.
Mm-hmm.
Jack moved to CBS. They were on NBC. And Jack made sure that Phil's segment on the Jack Benny show occurred in the first quarter hour.
Right.
First
Yeah.
15 minutes to give Phil time to go run, to travel, to bicycle down the block to NBC from CBS, which you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that's an extraordinary. That's a gracious gesture from a boss to a co-star and employee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he didn't take that for granted at all.
There's a bit to express the rapidity that he would have to make in order to make it across the street. There's a Fred Allen guest appearance episode where Rochester is sent out to go find Fred because he's intentionally delaying appearing on Jack's program. And so he guides Alan. He's like, well, walk across the street over here to CBS, and then you hear a weep. And then Fred goes, who was that? And Rochester goes, Phil Harris. Then there is another cast member that I'm always eternally fascinated by this man because he is he would go on to become a very major TV legend, Sheldon Leonard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sheldon Leonard, I can't say I got to know him well, but I got to talk to him on several occasions, and one time did a formal interview with him. And I also interviewed him at the CM Film Festival in one of its earlier years. This was a man whose resume is perhaps one of the longest and most eclectic of anybody associated with Jack. Because he started as an actor.
Yeah.
An actor on screen. He's a bogus immigrant farmer in the MGM movie of Tortilla Flat, where he's playing brown skin. He's playing ethnic.
Yeah. He's also in a Thin Man movie. I can't remember which one off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's in tons of movies. He's in I Have and Have Not with Bogart.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a lot of movies, and he played a little of everything. He played good guys, bad guys, and everything in between. And I don't know how early in the game he had his set his cap for a career behind the scenes. I don't know if that was always his goal or not, but he was a very good actor, and of course he kind of cornered the market on playing certain underworld types.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and that was perpetuated in a very funny way by the Jack Benny show, where he was the racetrack tout would say, hey, bud.
Huh?
And refer to everything in racetrack language.
Mm-hmm.
And he is the one who actually got to say to Jack Benny, your money or your life.
Oh, really?
Mm.
And if I'm not mistaken, and if I'm mistaken, somebody correct me, but I'm pretty sure he's the one who...
I think it's the television one in which he does it. I'm not sure, but Laura might be able to clarify that one. But
That's right. Eddie Barr was actually the original.
Okay.
Yeah. But he still gets to do that. And in addition, I think that tout has like I love the one where he finally is at a racetrack and he's giving him an opinion on a table to sit at the cafe. And Jack goes, "Wait a minute. This is the first time I've seen you at an actual racetrack. Why don't you give me a tip about a horse?" And he just goes, "Who knows about horses?"
Yeah.
Did you speak to him at all about any of his television producing, like his involvement in the Dick Van Dyke Show?
Just a little bit, because that's what everybody asked him about.
Sure.
And I was interested in the other aspects, other facets of his career. He had retired from acting, and although of course I didn't name his most famous screen appearance. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
He's
Who
the
does he have in
bartender.
A Wonderful Life? Say that.
And a decade later, when Frank Capra made Pocketful of Miracles,
Yes.
he wanted to have Sheldon Leonard come back and play the cliche, the character gangster part that him like glue, which he worked very hard to shed. But for Frank Capra, he did it.
Yes.
He did it. And I think Capra gave him box seat at the Dodger Stadium for a year, something like that.
Wow.
Something, instead of a cash payment for services rendered, he gave him something that was like more of a gesture than a fee. But he too, he like everyone that I met, was happy to be part of the extended Jack Benny ensemble, and looked at that part of his career with great fondness. And again, it took no persuasion to get him to talk about it. That's the one thing that I found, uniformly, getting to meet all these wonderful folks.
And there's one in that grouping that that you actually dedicate a lot of time in the book to when referencing comedy, especially in some later chapters. But George Balzer, one of Jack's writers, what was it like speaking to a writer? Because obviously talking to the actors is one thing because you have an impression of them, but what did it feel any different talking to a writer? Did you feel like you had to ask him different types of questions as opposed to a performer? Or?
Well, sure, of course.
Yeah.
And I wanted to put it in. I wanted to have some context to understand his career before and after working for Jack. So he worked for Jack for a very long time, and but he was a very nice man. He was retired at the time I met him. I think a friend of mine, Howard Green, served as a matchmaker, putting us together, and then we all had lunch together. I think I had the tape recorder running during leisurely lunch, and the thing I remember most has nothing to do with actual writing. It has to do with his career. That Jack came back from a meeting one day and said to George and the other members of the writing staff at the time, "Well, fellas, we're set for another 7 years." And as George said, you just didn't hear things like that. That was not typical. That was exceptional. Something that just didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how solid the position was.
Yeah.
In radio. Of course, no one could have known what kind of upheaval television would create and how they would deal with it. They dealt with it beautifully, of course. No, but no one could have predicted that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's Kathy's book actually talks about that nervousness. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, John. because that's like the whole point of like him just going like, I'm not sure what I'm gonna do here. And then you read the early reviews in Kathy's book, and it's just like people are like trying to get on board with it. But I feel like Balzer and that whole team, like it's like the early years of the radio show. They have to build up to the point to figure out their rhythm and their groove. Like
Right.
nothing happens instantaneously.
Right. It seems so. It seems. It appears seamless to us, looking back with hindsight. But it was not. It was not. They had a fair amount of trial and error, very little error, but a fair amount of trial and error, and they had some flack, some of the critics at the time. Read reviews of the first TV show, and not everybody was happy with it. Seems, with a few glitches here and there, it seems wonderful to us.
Mm-hmm.
We're grateful to have it, but the continuity of Jack's career, the fact that he really was successful at everything he put his hand to, the fact that he had such loyal colleagues,
Yeah.
that everyone was sort of rooting for him.
Yeah.
No one was people compete. No one competed in a way that you think of as cutthroat.
Yeah. I think a lot of his cast were generous to him because he had been generous to them in the past.
Yes, and as far as I interviewed Lauren Bacall once, and I asked what it was like to he and Bogart appeared together on Jack Benny show.
Right. Yeah.
Said, essentially what she said was the same that other people said to me. That said to me, you felt safe. They felt safe. They knew that they would not be embarrassed in any way.
Right. Yeah.
They would be treated well. That they were in good hands. And that's what made it comfortable for them to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you talk about the transition to television, and unlike William Conrad, the cast of the Jack Benny Show more or less fits the characters that they had been playing. And I wonder, when you met them in real life, how closely did, like, Phil Harris and Dennis Day fit the characters that they had played in real life?
I think it's fair to say in almost no way. I didn't spend enough time with Dennis Day to feel like I got to know him in any way, or with Phil Harris either. Phil Harris was kind of like Phil told me, taking a presumptuous here, Mr. Harris told me that he and Alice didn't want to do a TV show. Too much work. They were very happy living in the Palm Springs area. But they wanted to be active. They just didn't want to overdo it. And that's why they chose to do a radio show. A radio show on the weekend. They could drive up on, say, Friday and do rehearsal and dress rehearsal Saturday, and then have the rest of the week to themselves, back where they were comfortable, where they were raising two daughters. In that sense, Phil was kind of like the Desi Arnaz to Alice's Lucy. He was the guiding force, and So he was far from the happy-go-lucky, hard-drinking,
Right.
playboy.
Yeah.
Unlike Ozzie and Harriet, the real children were never the actors in the Phil Harris Alice Faye show, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Janine Roos was one of them, who we lost not too long ago, and Ann Whitfield was the other. We had them at the first convention, and they had some very lovely stories to talk about how the experience with working with Phil and Alice was far more preferential to some other gigs that they had on radio at that time. It's interesting. That's actually, I believe we're starting to put some of the first year stuff on YouTube. That's one that can go up here in the next week, because I think that people would get a good insight into what it was like working directly with Phil and Alice. And actually, to Leonard, you touched on in almost no possible way did they resemble the characters that they played. Phil always said in several interviews later on in his life on the radio that Jack took one part of you and then amplified it 500 times or put it under a microscope. And he actually, I remember he said to him in an interview, he recalled this story where he's like, Jack went up to him and said, like, I made you a drunken band leader. I made you a guy who carouses with women. I then got you married. I don't know how to kill you. And then there's a blank in the room that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. In addition to Jack's work, he's obviously known for being Wascally Wabbits and Despicable Ducks. What is it like sitting in a room or talking to Mel Blanc?
Well, he was one of my idols. I wrote him a fan letter when I was like 12 years old, and he answered. And he answered on stationery that had kind of a light blue rendering of Bugs Bunny. So he typed the letter, but you could see Bugs Bunny in the background.
Sure.
And so I was just a fan letter, and he wrote a lovely note back. And then I wrote again later on to ask him some other questions, and he very kind in answering them. And then finally, when I moved here, this coast, got to meet him on a couple of occasions. And he was a performer's performer, and he needed no persuasion to do his characters for you. You wanted Yosemite Sam, you got Yosemite Sam 100%.
Yeah.
And, not a throwaway Yosemite.
Do you have a favorite character he did on Jack's show?
I think Professor LeBlanc. I mean, it's hard not to say the Mexican,
Yeah, the seaside.
The seaside routine,
Seaside.
train announcer, yeah.
Yeah, everything he did was great, and he talked about the fact that Jack was such a great audience for anything Mel did. Jack was laughing longer and louder than anyone, and that's another reason that he enjoyed, he enjoyed being part of that group.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare to talk about somebody, a legendary figure in show business of that era or any era, where no one has an unkind word to say.
Mm-hmm.
And quite the opposite, like the complete opposite. People go out of their way to say how nice, how kind, how generous, how giving, as a scene partner, as a co-star, as a boss. Everyone feels the same about Jack. So Mel Blanc, and Mel Blanc also told stories about how Jack was given to such enthusiasm. This is the greatest cup of soup I've ever had. You know, and Mel and his wife had him over for lunch one day, and something like that. This is the greatest sandwich I've ever eaten.
Yeah. So when you're interviewing Mel or anybody, how do you decide, like, especially with such a huge career, how do you decide what questions you're going to ask?
Well, it depends on if there's a specific purpose for the interview. When I was working on the radio book, Great American Broadcast, that was my focus. And sometimes I got, wished I'd had the chance to do a second interview,
right,
where we just talked about Warner Brothers cartoons.
Sure.
But I believe when I met him here in his home in Pacific Palisades, it was almost all about radio.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's you mentioned
radio and television, Jack.
Right. In mentioning Professor LeBlanc, that and the department store clerk are always interesting to my mind with Mel, because it's showing it's dark comedy essentially, because both these characters are long suffering and like overtly neurotic, and it's examining human tics, and it's like I think it was like you can see it in the Mel Blanc documentary that Keith Scott's interviewed with in it, but and I believe you're in there too. Is that somebody said like he's not just a great voice actor; he's a good actor. Period.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, he was a great singer.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck break into song. And even in What's Opera Doc, the famous
oh yeah,
he and Arthur Q. Bryan, who voiced Elmer Fudd, are at the peak of their powers there, and they're singing Wagner.
Yeah, there's like, if you get the Looney Tunes Golden Collections, which you are on many of the featurettes, I think you can hear Mel and Arthur Q. Bryan like in some rehearsal sessions in one or two clips of them doing. They primarily do Arthur Q. Bryan doing "I'm going to kill the wabbit," and so you can get a kind of example of how wonderful they were, but also Big Bear Lake and his Jolson. I love.
I love his Jolson. Jolson puts me away.
Yeah.
Puts me away.
So.
Yeah. Well, I just want to ask about the since we mentioned the Looney Tunes and the Golden Collection and those special features that you appear on, I noticed you wear like a Bugs Bunny pin, and I wonder if you've got any Jack Benny pins of any kind.
Again, I apologize for this terrible cough. I don't have a Jack Benny pin. I do collect pins, and I try to wear them on appropriate occasions. And try as I may, I'm just going to have to fashion one of my own, I guess.
Go into the metalworks.
And what I may do is I may take one of the Radio Mirror magazines, one of those magazines where there's a nice rendering of him, and just shrink it down. Make a pin out of that. I have a W.C. Fields pin of that kind.
That would be a good one. Actually, and John for his podcast has lovely merch as well. So like, you find a T-shirt from John, hands down, just reach out to him. And
I've got LSMFT right now, which is Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
My daughter, who is now 36. Grew up listening to the Jack Benny show tapes that we would play in our car, and her point of entry was Dennis Day. That's what she found. That's who she clung to, and was attracted to when she was
Yeah.
5 years old, 6, 7 years old, and
Wow.
and she loved those tapes. When she made her first travels in her teen years without us, she took those tapes along as kind of her security blanket. They made her feel comfortable. They made her feel safe at home, and so everybody comes to Jack Benny in different ways, and for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I heard on one of your podcasts where she mentioned you showed a picture of the cast for the first time, and what was her response?
Didn't want to know. You didn't want to know what they looked like. She said, "Take it away, take it away." She had already created in her mind her images of the cast
And their mice.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But that's as we all know, that's the power of radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that tool that we have, and it's funny, when we were doing the animation talk last year, I realized I didn't think to bring this up, but it's like Jack's show always felt like some kind of chaotic cartoon going on, so that's how I tend to still picture it, as like a Warner Brothers cartoon with added padding for like soft, subtler moments. But there's also like the feel of like Morrow and Boulogne have this energy about them in their episodes in the late 30s and early 40s that feel like a Warner Brothers cartoon, especially like Mr. Billingsley as a WB character that just didn't get drawn.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse has said on more than one occasion that the reason that she likes the show so much, or liked the show when she first was getting exposed to it, unlike some other old radio shows that I played for her, I didn't have to explain any of the jokes.
Yeah.
That there was mostly non-topical humor, and as all of the members of the Jack Benny fan club know, the general rule of thumb for the writing on the Benny show was character driven, and so all the comedy comes out of those character traits. And so I played some craft music halls with Al Jolson and Oscar Levant, which I enjoyed, and she said it required too much explaining.
Yeah. Oh, and Fred Allen is the same way, where there's too many references to topical things.
Yes.
Yeah. But the advantage of Fred Allen, I found, is that it actually gives you an entry point to educate yourself on local and national news of the era. It's like a
yes, it's true. It's which we take as a benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
as a bonus.
Because you can look it up on YouTube, or like you can listen to H.V. Kaltenborn and other newscasters of the era. It just gives you like an added like extended universe of the shows that you love, and it turns you into a history buff overnight.
Right. When I was a kid, growing up and watching the Warner Brothers cartoons, they were my sort of social education for the 40s, especially. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of wartime references, put out that light,
Yeah. I'm surprised that when we watch those cartoons with my children, they are fascinated and they want to know who everybody is.
Yeah. And
it's not like because they don't know them, they don't want to watch those cartoons. They're like, I want to see another one like that. They love those caricature cartoons.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, and of course, when Rocky and Bullwinkle came along, it took me years to learn that there was an opera named Boris Godunov. The name Boris Godunov was a spin on that, but I didn't resent that. I enjoyed, getting to learn about things I didn't know.
Yeah.
And the Simpsons do the same thing. The Simpsons, their frame of reference is so broad, from Citizen Kane, to Planet of the Apes and beyond.
Yeah, I was doing an episode of my podcast on Kane recently, and I was just like, it's pretty much you could make any Simpsons episode out of a Kane reference and turn it into something. We have one last question for you, Leonard, and it relates to what you brought up with Jessie about exposing her to old time radio and to Jack Benny. We all know that if you follow Leonard on Twitter, he is not just a film historian and a loving father, he is now a loving grandfather.
Yes.
And I have to imagine that you will at some point pop on a cassette tape or a CD or a YouTube file for the kid. How do you think you would go about introducing Jack to the kid? Would it be the same way with Jessie, or would you try something different with it?
Well, I'd probably stick to what works. I'd probably do it in the car if we were traveling somewhere for a half hour or more, and hope that she would take to it. And you never know. There's no guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of kids resist being force fed, even when they're very young.
Right.
You start them young. If you start them young enough, they don't have a smart ass. They're a little more docile. They're a little more receptive, and so that's what I would try.
I've started a thing with my kids where during the summer they can only watch black and white. And so, they complain, I don't want to watch this. I said, then go outside and play. And they'll go outside and play. But when they want to come in and watch something, black and white.
I showed my nephew Looney Tunes when he was very, very young, and the Roadrunner got him very excited. But he's now more like, it's kind of just like, you need to kind of put it on in the background, and then occasionally he'll look up and go like, what's that? Like we showed him some early Disney films on that same premise of just put it in the background. He might look up from his iPad and give it a glance, and then maybe just put it down, But
I've got a last question for you too, Leonard, if we could. You're a movie guy, so of all the Jack Benny movies, which one do you think is the best, and which is maybe the worst?
Well, I actually like The Meanest Man in the World.
Mm-hmm.
But the best movie on a movie without a sliding scale, without any
right
external pressure, is To Be or Not to Be, because it's not a Jack Benny movie. It's an Ernst Lubitsch movie that stars Jack Benny and Carole Lombard, and it is a masterpiece. A great, great movie. My favorite Jack Benny movie is probably The Horn Blows at Midnight.
Yeah. We talked about that 2 years ago. I love that we've found a positive space to talk about that movie, because it's such a fun, joyous time to watch it, even though you kind of like you can objectively recognize why it didn't do super well, but like internally you're just like, yeah, but this is just fun, and it's fun to have fun.
Yeah.
Well, I heard on the radio that it wasn't very good. I didn't bother going to see it.
I had the opposite. I actively looked for it. I'm like, get me a VHS player immediately. Well, Leonard, thank you so much for taking the time for a third year in the row. This is the third annual convention, and you've been with us all 3 years. I am so delighted, and I know John feels the same way, that we got to talk about your love of radio this time, and to hear your voice and your eyes, and see your eyes light up at the mention of a lot of these figures that you grew to love and got to meet.
I feel so lucky that my timing has been good in life. I came along at the right moment when I wanted to write about animation and learn about animation history. So many of the people were still alive that made that history. and the same for radio. I mean, I got to talk to Norman Corwin, Arch Oboler, Elliot Lewis, the people who are like the pillars of radio. If that list had included Jack Benny, would have been nice, or Fred Allen. But I can't be greedy because I've been very lucky.
Yes. Well, I know because I just bought this book that even though it's not in print, it is still available. I'd also like to recommend to anybody, if you can find a copy of Make 'Em Laugh, it's a great PBS documentary series in which Leonard Maltin appears on the Jack Benny portion.
Yeah. And, we've talked a lot about, especially in the last panel with Kathy, of contextualizing media and whatnot, and talking about it within Jack's sphere. If folks out there want to see Leonard at his finest, and if you can find them, get some of these Walt Disney treasures, please. This on the front lines thing taught me a lot in high school that the teachers weren't teaching me.
My kids love the Annette series. That's their favorite.
Yeah.
You're raising your kids right.
But more importantly, on that front, even though you didn't get to meet Mr. Benny, Leonard, I'm pretty sure I can speak for myself and everybody here, which is he would have enjoyed meeting you and getting to talk to you, because you've been as kind as Jack is with your time with us. It's so greatly appreciated, my friend.
Well, this is no chore. It's a treat for me.
Yeah. And we should say that we mentioned Keith Scott earlier, who you had recently on your podcast. He will be coming later tonight to do a little bit of Mel Blanc talk. So the voice artist world and the animation world is well represented with you and him in this humble Zoom room.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you for being so welcoming.